welcome back to Chris's Fantasy Space. My name is Chris. This is the show where I talk all about some of my favourite books that I've been reading recently. Now, usually I would like to talk about fantasy. As you can probably tell from behind me, fantasy is my favourite genre that I love. But seeing as it's October, I thought I would get into some more horror, and who better to read in the horror genre than Stephen King. As you can tell by the title of today's video, hopefully you can tell that I'm going to be talking about the book Misery. Now, I've done two previous videos that are already out on the books Carrie and Pet Sematary. Now, I wanted to do a third one. I wanted to do a series of 3 videos on Stephen King because, as you saw in maybe my Carrie video, me and Stephen King haven't always got on. I haven't always been able to get into his books very well. So I picked 2 very well-known, quite short stories in Carrie and Pet Sematary to start off with. I didn't want to start with something like It, which is an absolute tome, or The Shining, because I thought, it's a little bit too, I wanted to do some stuff that maybe isn't quite as well-known as that. However, compared to Carrie and Pet Sematary, I think Misery is quite a lesser known. I know obviously for big Stephen King fans it's a very famous story, but I think generally speaking people probably don't know as much about Misery as they do Pet Sematary and Carrie. So I thought this would be quite a good one to start off with. Now, I've got to be honest, when I started reading it, I've got maybe 30-40 pages in and I thought, I don't know about this one. I really don't know, because I really enjoyed Pet Sematary, really enjoyed Carrie. You can go back and watch the videos on them to hear my full views, but I started reading this one, I just really wasn't sure. I wasn't sure if this was going to be it for me. But then actually when I finished it about 2 or 3 days ago, and I sat there and I literally stayed on the sofa for probably 4 or 5 hours and read it from about page 50 straight through to the end. It really gripped me, this one. I'll talk more about that a bit later on. But I want to give you kind of the elevator pitch. Like, what is Misery? What is this story about? Well, essentially it's about a writer called Paul Sheldon. Now, I know obviously if you're a big Stephen King fan, writing about a writer, it becomes sort of a bit of a trope for him, and this is my first sort of way of getting into that. I know obviously The Shining, obviously the main character in that is a writer as well, but Misery is definitely one that falls into his sort of trope of writing about authors and their struggles, or their not struggles maybe, to actually put pen to paper and write, or fingers to typewriters, as is the case in Misery. The elevator pitch, like I said, Paul Sheldon, very famous author. He writes these books about this female character called Misery, which is where the book gets its title. And she is kind of a mystery action adventure heroine from I think like the late 1800s, maybe 1900s. I can't quite remember, but kind of like olden times. And they make him loads of money. He's very well off, but he kind of doesn't like these stories very much. He sees them as his cash cow, and he's decided to kill this character off. He's written a book which is kind of the one that is her final story, and he feels great, he feels free of her. But unfortunately for Paul, he gets into a car accident, and he is found by his number one fan, a lady called Annie Wilkes. And the story progresses from there. She is supposedly used to be a nurse, and she takes him back to her house, puts him in this bed and starts to look after him. He ends up finding out that his pelvis is crushed. He can't use his legs properly, and so he is kind of completely at her mercy. And what he finds out is when she says that she's his number one fan because she absolutely adores this character of Misery and this series of books that he wrote based on her. That's kind of the general elevator pitch. Again, like I did with Carrie and Pet Sematary, I don't really want to give anything away. For specific reasons with this book, actually, because although Carrie and Pet Sematary might be the more famous of Stephen King stories of the 3 that I've read recently, I think this might well be my favourite one, which is odd because actually there's no real supernatural element to it at all. There's no, whereas Carrie and Pet Sematary end up having these supernatural things that happen that can't quite be explained. This is just basically a story of 2 humans and their interaction. But one thing I did find, again, like I mentioned at the beginning, I kind of struggled. That opening, again, of the book, it was a slow start, and I found that with Pet Sematary as well. And I wonder if this is something that is kind of a thing with Stephen King, where the books start a little bit slow, but when they start to build tension and build momentum, it's really difficult to put them down. And this book, oh my goodness, the way it builds the tension and everything that is going to happen, because you know that at some point it's going to blow up. Things are going to get absolutely crazy. You know at some point it just has to happen. And the build up to that is so good. And then the payoff as well is great. There are so many things about this book that I absolutely love. One of my favorite things being that when Annie realizes he plans to kill Misery off, she kind of coerces him or forces him into rewriting the book and bringing her back because she doesn't like the idea of her being dead. And she gets him this typewriter that is missing the letter N to rewrite it. And you actually get excerpts from Misery's Return is the book, and it's done in a different font within the book. And all of the times that the N should be there, you can see it in the book in the type of the font used in the book that there's no N, and he's had to handwrite the N's in. It's very, very clever. It's a really cool little point. And then later on in the story, the typewriter loses the T and it loses an E. And so there's more and more letters that he can't fill in on the typewriter that he has to type and then fill in with by hand later on. Another thing that I love about this is the feeling of helplessness that Paul has. Like, he's always at her mercy, and any kind of win that he thinks he's going to get, you later find out, no, she's one step ahead. She wanted him to do this. She expected him to get this far, to do this, to push back this much, and then she punishes him. And some of those scenes in which she punishes Paul for things that he's done or things that she thinks or assumes he's done are absolutely horrifying. You know, like I said, there's no supernatural element to this book necessarily, but some of the things that she does in her twisted mind, the way that she views other people, are absolutely horrifying. Again, something I really have started to appreciate about Stephen King is that he doesn't go into too much detail with everything. This book is this long, you can kind of tell from here, and it could easily have been like double that if he'd taken like too much time to go into loads of detail about everything going on. And actually, with some of the things that happen towards the end of the book, you don't need paragraphs and paragraphs, pages and pages of exact detail about what these characters are doing to each other, because what's implied and what isn't said is almost scarier as a reader than what Stephen King is literally putting pen to paper and telling you. So overall, I mean, I'm almost kind of surprised to say it. When I've decided to read Carrie, Pet Sematary, and Misery, I thought this would be my least favourite of them, especially when I started reading it. But actually, I think this is one that I enjoyed the most, and I think that is mostly purely down to just how amazing of a villain, of a horrible character Annie Wilkes really is. When there's a scene in the book where Paul realizes more about Annie's history and things that she's done in the past, and you can't even believe what you're reading. And obviously it's fictional, so obviously you're not supposed to believe it, but I couldn't believe that this character who acted in one way so much at the beginning could be capable of some of the stuff that it comes out that she actually did. She is easily one of the most horrible villains or antagonists, whatever you want to call her, that I've ever read. An incredible character of Stephen King. Another thing that was kind of surprising about this book in a way was it kind of has an almost hopeful, I wouldn't say happy ending, but there's almost like a sense of hope towards the end of it. So I'm kind of glad that I chose Misery to be the last book that I finished on, rather than finishing on Pet Sematary or Carrie. Because I think if I'd finished on some of those other ones, it might have been a much more dark Halloween than the one that we're actually going to get with the world as it is at the moment. So there you have it. I've gone through today Misery, and I've also got my other videos on Carrie and Pet Sematary. And I've got to be honest, I'm so pleased that I decided to get back into Stephen King and give him another chance, because I decided years ago that I just thought, oh, maybe Stephen King's just not for me. But I'm so glad that I did that. And if that was you as well, if you had tried to get into Stephen King before, but maybe you hadn't had the luck, same as me with The Shining and the Dark Tower series, definitely worth getting back into him to read these ones that I've tried out. If you enjoyed those reviews that I've put up, please give them a like. Please go and check my other review of The Last Wish, the first Witcher book by Andrzej Sapkowski, and I will see you on the next Chris's Fantasy Space.